Yeah, some of the censorship stuff has been a little bit insane then, and has carried on.
It's only going to get more insane.
How bad?
Yeah, because they're trying to put AI in charge of the internet, and not just in charge of censoring what's on the internet, but also having AI make the lion's share of online content. So supposedly by 2025, generative AI like ChatGPT is going to produce like 96 or something % of everything you read online, which means their mainstream media journalists are going to be like completely replaced by them. I think there have been some magazines that have been caught using ChatGPT to write their stories already. I think Sports Illustrated was one. But
wow.
only going to get crazier. And so when you have AI both like producing and then curating, i.e. censoring, everything, then AI dominates the information environment, and whoever programs AI and stipulates like what information is okay and who isn't has like unprecedented control. And when you consider that most people today get their information from online or, digital sources, that's unprecedented control of what people, not just how the information that people like read and receive, but also, you're manipulating how people perceive reality. And that obviously translates into how people behave. And actually, Henry Kissinger, who I'm sure died recently, and the guy that he named as his heir, which is Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, wrote a book on AI explicitly about that, and how AI is basically going to control how we perceive reality by taking control of online content in its entirety. And that us becoming increasingly dependent on AI for everything is going to cognitively diminish people, so that we won't be able to perceive reality or make sense of anything without AI doing it for us.
It's going to be like, have you seen the film? You seen WALL-E or WALL-E?
Yeah, like maybe years and years and years ago, where the people
so we're just gonna be like
yeah,
in the pods drinking milkshakes.
Yeah, but worse than that, because it seems like they're sort of like, they have some sort of cognitive faculty left. What Kissinger and Schmidt say is that people are going to lose that, and it's the plan that they lose that.
Maybe they just won't need us anymore.
Well, I think, if people can't control how they perceive reality, they're no longer capable of critical analysis and thought. It's very easy to decide what you do with people.
So where does that put you then in terms of AI? Are you pro the technology?
I have a lot of opinions. I
want to hear them all.
Yeah, I don't use them. I think the whole idea of getting a lot of people to like use ChatGPT and all of this stuff is to lead us down this path that Kissinger and Schmidt, among others, sort of are charting out for humanity. Where if you, it's pretty much common sense though. Like if you develop a skill and then don't do it for 10 or 15 years, for example, you kind of forget how to do it, right? Or even, I graduated from university like a little more than 10 years ago. How well do I recall the stuff that I took in university? Not great, right? So there's this whole idea of if you don't use it, you lose it. So if people are depending on AI to tell them where to turn when they're driving their car, and no one uses like actual maps anymore. I understand that it's convenient, right? And I'm not saying like, oh, we need to go back to the 90s, right? But it becomes after a while a slippery slope where people are just having the computer tell them everything to do. Every step of their lives ends up becoming micromanaged to an extent. And the idea is that AI, through all the data that it absorbs about us, knows so much about us. Some of these people say it knows us better than we even know ourselves. That allows for an unprecedented degree of manipulation. And the problem is that the people producing and programming AI and ultimately controlling AI and what it can do not have our best interests at heart. And it is not a good idea to basically hand them our brains in a bag, we should keep those.
I've been using AI for work a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
Like a more advanced search engine.
Yeah, totally. But who owns AI, right? It's pretty much Silicon Valley companies. So like even OpenAI, Sam Altman's thing, that's essentially like owned by Microsoft, right? And so you have what? Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Oracle, all of these companies essentially owning like almost everything. And all of those companies are contractors for the military and intelligence, right? Guess throw Palantir in the mix too. And when you consider something like Palantir, they profile people. They suck up all of your data and then they profile you. And Palantir can profile like whether or not they deem you subversive or not. And what happens when AI, gets access of that and gets put in control of things like humanitarian aid, like they're talking about doing, or in charge of, the government itself, which is also talked about in the Schmidt-Kissinger book. It gets complicated. So, a lot of people have been talking about the coming sort of like social credit paradigm, for example. So what happens if there's a big crisis, your country is like a war zone or the economy collapses and you're dependent on humanitarian aid or some sort of aid from the government or some other group and there isn't enough for everyone, right? And so they decide, oh, well, it's fair to put super intelligent AI in charge of it. And then that AI is like, oh, well, this person's been very compliant and hasn't committed all of these thought crimes, but not you. Who is it going to decide to give the food rations to and stuff like that? That's the risk of a lot of this stuff when it gets put in charge of too many systems. And then there's like a whole other side to it when you're dealing with stuff like AI weaponry, which we're seeing being used right now in the Israel-Gaza conflict to a significant degree, where they're deciding assassination targets, suppose people that they're deeming to be Hamas affiliated, which no one knows exactly how they're determining that. I mean, it could be someone who is a second cousin of someone in Hamas or something. We don't really know because there's no transparency. But obviously, the fact that they've gone from before this AI algorithm to identifying something like 15 to 20 targets a day to identifying hundreds of targets a day, something's going on. And there's a huge issue there with what if that AI is using, social media activity to decide who lives and who dies, literally. And what happens when that kind of technology gets exported. I mean, Israel's tech sector specifically is known for testing all sorts of tech on Palestinian surveillance tech and weapons tech, and then they export it abroad. Israel's defense tech and defense industry is massive. It's like, I think, one of the biggest parts of their GDP, right? So, this isn't just going to stay there. And AI weaponry has also been tested in Ukraine to a significant degree. And there's a lot of people, the same people that created Palantir, essentially Peter Thiel, a lot of that money is behind, the AI weaponry stuff today. That's troubling stuff. And then there's another issue of whether AI is actually accurate or not. So, they'll say, like with facial recognition, I think there was a report a few years ago in the UK that a lot of the facial recognition stuff that the Met Police and other law enforcement groups are using are insanely inaccurate. But they want to continue using it and like deepen its involvement in identifying people, whether it's like at live events and all sorts of stuff. And I mean, it was insanely inaccurate. I mean, I can't remember the exact amount, but it was like under 50% accurate. So like flipping a coin is more accurate in that case. And what happens when AI algorithms that choose who lives and who dies, are put in charge of stuff and they're like 70% accurate or less? Because, I mean, the government's really corrupt with contractors. Like, they don't always pick the best contractor for the job. So someone has connections that gets their AI in charge and they oversell their AI and say it's 90% 95% accurate, but it's not audited by an independent company, right? And so it's actually like in reality 65% accurate or something. And you're putting it in charge of like stuff that has a major effect on people's lives. That kind of stuff is happening. And I'm talking about stuff that hasn't necessarily quite happened yet, but we're headed there.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty bleak. So I know on Twitter, I'm pretty sure I've interacted with AI bots now. Like, there's the very obvious ones that you can tell. There's the very obvious ones. You're like, I know that's an AI bot because they see something I post and they write a automated response to that. But there's other times where I've started a conversation on, I think that's I haven't been 100% sure it's an AI bot. In your head, you're like, there's a suspicion there. But also, I've used AI to create content. Sometimes, if I'm in a rush, silly things like own a football team, write my program notes. I just put in the things I want to say and let the AI write it. But clearly, if I'm doing that, people are going to be doing more advanced things. But it kind of put me in this place, Whitney, where I'm thinking, it feels like the internet is going to become unusable. Like I might just reject it.
It's going to become very different. For a lot of different reasons. So I guess the risk with using like ChatGPT or generative AI, for example, is like if you use it too much that like you can't write without it, right? That's like the stuff people need to try and manage, I think. As far as, what happens when all the content becomes ChatGPT, essentially, right? I mean, it's not really going to be very useful to people, but there's a lot of people that aren't really going to be able to notice so much the difference because it's like legible English and it kind of makes sense and, but it's not going to be like human thought anymore. Though there was a problem identified, I think, several months ago that once, these AI algorithms start training off of data that humans didn't produce, and it's training off of data or like content that it produced itself or another generative AI produced, its output becomes like gobbledygook, nonsensical stuff. So, I mean, it might just break itself. We'll see what happens, or if they're able to, I guess, remedy that. But regardless of that, the internet is going to change a lot. And this is a very like separate thing than what we've been talking about so far. But there's a deliberate push to regulate the internet. So
before we go into that, can I ask you one more question about AI then?
Of course.
Is there any good you see in it?
I mean, obviously there is some truth to the fact that it does make certain things more convenient. It does technically free up certain people's jobs so they can have more time to do other stuff. Yeah. The problem is literally the worst people in the world are in charge of it. And they want to use it to make everyone basically a complete idiot that's super easily manipulated and controllable. And that is what needs to be resisted. So, if someone wants to make like an open source AI that, I don't know, does some stuff, I mean, I'm not going to be like, no, don't do that. But, I think it's very important now more than ever to divest as much as possible from big tech, Google and Oracle and, all these other companies, Amazon, what have you, because they have too much power. The people in charge have obvious problematic agendas. And they basically, at least in the US, they own the government. I mean, they basically control the government. The tech billionaires fund almost all the politicians. They have access to all of the data of the military and intelligence agencies. And frankly, the Silicon Valley companies and the national security state in the US have fused 100%. They are the same blob. You can't tell where one ends and one begins anymore. That's highly problematic. That's fascism, right? When corporations and government fuse. So yeah, Silicon Valley fascism has arrived, at least in the United States. I think a lot of people just haven't realized it yet. So those companies we cannot feed, and they feed off of our data. They've been saying for years, data is the new oil. So instead of the oil barons of the early 20th century, these are the data barons of now. We need to divest from them if we do not want them to have extreme entrenched power, because a lot of these guys are transhumanists with the view that humans must merge with machine, not that the humans that want to merge with machine can. Right. And a lot of this stuff becomes like highly problematic after a while, including a lot of their visions for how human society needs to be organized. They're very clearly, the majority of them, not interested in democracy at all. They're interested in some sort of technocracy or some sort of authoritarian, very controlled environment,